30 Christmas dinners showed up on American tables every December in the 1950s.
Can you pass the gravy, please?
Of course, dear.
Your grandmother made them. Your great-grandmother perfected them. They were in Betty Crocker's Christmas cookbook, handwritten on recipe cards and served at holiday gatherings across the country.
They have something special in the way of a sandwich in mind. Sally calls it tuna rarebit.
But today, you won't find a single one at your Christmas dinner. We replaced them with spiral-cut ham from the grocery store and rotisserie chicken from Costco.
Remember to baste it every 15 minutes, just like we always do, dear.
These weren't basic holiday meals. They were elaborate Christmas dinners that took hours to prepare, cost less than $10 to make, and tasted better than anything you'll order from a restaurant today. They vanished completely by the 1980s. We're bringing back all 30. Crown roast of pork was the showstopper Christmas dinner of the 1950s. If this appeared on your family's table, everyone knew Christmas was special. Betty Crocker's recipe created a crown-shaped roast by tying 2 pork rib roasts together in a circle, then filling the center with apple stuffing made from bread cubes, diced apples, celery, onions, and sage. The result was a dinner that looked like it belonged in a castle. In the 1950s, crown roast of pork was what you served when you wanted to impress. The butcher would prepare the crown for you, taking 2 pork rib roasts, Frenching the bones, scraping them clean, and tying them into a circle with kitchen twine. The roast would stand upright in the roasting pan, and as it cooked, the bones would turn golden while the meat stayed tender and juicy. The apple stuffing was the secret weapon. You'd sauté onions and celery in butter until soft, then mix them with cubed bread, diced tart apples, chicken broth, and herbs. The mixture went into the center of the crown, and as the pork roasted, the stuffing absorbed all the pork drippings and apple juices. The result was stuffing that tasted like Christmas, savory, sweet, and impossibly rich. Roast goose was the traditional Christmas dinner in America before turkey took over. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe roasted a whole goose until the skin turned dark and crispy, then served it with chestnut stuffing made from roasted chestnuts, sausage, bread, and herbs. The result was a dinner that was rich, fatty, gamey, and completely different from turkey. In the 1950s, roast goose was still common at Christmas, especially in families with European roots. Goose was traditional in England, Germany, and Scandinavia, and immigrants brought the tradition to America. The bird was expensive, goose cost more than turkey, but it was considered the proper Christmas dinner. The flavor of roast goose is intense. The meat is dark and rich, almost like duck, but meatier. The fat renders during roasting, creating a layer of liquid gold at the bottom of the pan that's used to make gravy. The skin gets incredibly crispy, crispier than turkey or chicken, and it shatters when you bite into it. The chestnut stuffing adds sweetness and texture, and the sausage makes it hearty. The genius of roast goose was the fat. A goose is mostly fat, and as it roasts, that fat bastes the meat automatically. You'd prick the skin all over with a fork before roasting, which allowed the fat to escape and the skin to crisp up. The rendered goose fat was saved and used for cooking potatoes, vegetables, and even spreading on toast. Roast goose disappeared when turkey became cheaper and more readily available in the 1960s. Glazed ham with pineapple and cloves was the easiest impressive Christmas dinner you could make in the 1950s. Betty Crocker's recipe started with a fully cooked bone-in ham, scored the surface in a diamond pattern, studded it with whole cloves, then covered it with pineapple rings and a glaze made from brown sugar, mustard, and pineapple juice. The result was a ham that looked beautiful and tasted sweet, smoky, and tangy. In the 1950s, ham was a popular Christmas dinner because it required minimal work. You bought a pre-cooked ham, decorated it, glazed it, and baked it. No complicated techniques, no hours of active cooking. The ham came out of the oven golden and glossy, with caramelized pineapple rings covering the surface. Each pineapple ring had a maraschino cherry in the center, which made the ham look festive and colorful. The flavor of glazed ham was a balance of sweet and savory. The ham itself was salty and smoky. The brown sugar glaze caramelized during baking, creating a sweet crust. The pineapple added tanginess and moisture. The cloves added a warm, spicy aroma that filled the entire house. The genius of this dinner was how foolproof it was. The ham was already cooked, so you couldn't overcook it. The worst that could happen was the glaze would burn slightly. But even then, the ham was still delicious. You'd serve it with scalloped potatoes and green beans, and the meal was complete. Glazed ham disappeared when spiral-cut hams became popular in the 1990s. Beef Wellington was the ultimate luxury Christmas dinner in the 1950s. Betty Crocker's recipe wrapped a beef tenderloin in mushroom duxelles, finely chopped mushrooms cooked down with shallots and herbs, then encased everything in puff pastry and baked it until the pastry was golden and the beef was perfectly medium rare. The result was a dinner that looked like it came from a French restaurant. In the 1950s, beef Wellington was what you made when money was no object. Beef tenderloin was expensive, it still is, and puff pastry was difficult to make from scratch. This was a special occasion dinner, reserved for Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, when you wanted to pull out all the stops. The genius of beef Wellington was the layers of flavor and texture. The beef tenderloin was seasoned with salt and pepper, then seared until browned on all sides. The mushroom duxelles added earthiness and moisture. The puff pastry created a crispy, buttery shell that contrasted with the tender beef. When you sliced into it, the layers were visible. Golden pastry, dark mushrooms, pink beef. The dish required technique. The beef had to be cooked to exactly the right temperature. 135-degree Fahrenheit for medium rare. If it was undercooked, the pastry would be soggy. If it was overcooked, the beef would be dry. The mushroom duxelles had to be cooked until all the moisture evaporated. Otherwise, it would make the pastry soggy. The pastry had to be rolled thin enough to cook through, but thick enough not to tear. Beef Wellington disappeared when elaborate dinner party dishes fell out of fashion in the 1980s. The dish was seen as too fussy, too expensive, and too risky. One mistake, and you'd ruined an expensive piece of beef. By the 1990s, beef Wellington was a rarity outside of upscale restaurants. But beef Wellington is worth making. Yes, it's expensive. A beef tenderloin costs about $50. Roast duck with orange sauce was the French-inspired Christmas dinner that showed you had sophistication. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe roasted a whole duck until the skin was crispy and the meat was tender, then served it with a sauce made from orange juice, orange zest, sugar, and vinegar. The result was a dinner that was rich, fatty, sweet, and tangy. In the 1950s, duck was less common than turkey or ham, which made it feel special. Duck was associated with French cuisine, and anything French was considered fancy. The combination of duck and orange sauce, called canard à l'orange in French, was a classic pairing that appeared in upscale restaurants and ambitious home kitchens. The flavor of duck is intense. The meat is dark and rich, with a gamey quality that's stronger than chicken, but milder than wild game. The fat content is high, which makes the meat incredibly flavorful and the skin incredibly crispy. The orange sauce cuts through the richness with its bright, citrusy sweetness. The vinegar adds acidity, and the sugar caramelizes to create depth. The technique for roast duck involved rendering the fat. You'd prick the skin all over with a fork, which allowed the fat to escape during roasting. The duck would sit on a rack so the fat dripped into the pan below. After roasting, you'd use some of that duck fat to make the orange sauce, which added even more richness. Roast duck with orange sauce disappeared when duck became harder to find in regular grocery stores in the 1970s. Cornish game hens were the elegant individual portion Christmas dinner of the 1950s. Betty Crocker's recipe roasted small hens, about 1 to 2 pounds each, stuffed with wild rice, mushrooms, and herbs, then served 1 hen per person. The result was a dinner that looked fancy and felt personalized. In the 1950s, Cornish game hens were considered upscale because each guest got their own bird. It felt luxurious and special, like you were dining at a fancy restaurant. The hens were small enough to cook quickly, about an hour in the oven, but impressive enough to serve at Christmas dinner. The flavor of Cornish game hens is similar to chicken but slightly richer and more tender. The wild rice stuffing added earthiness and texture. Wild rice was expensive in the 1950s, which made this dinner feel even more special. The mushrooms added umami, and the herbs, typically sage, thyme, and rosemary, made everything taste like the holidays. The genius of this dinner was the portion control. With turkey or ham, you had to carve and serve, and some people got more meat than others. With Cornish game hens, everyone got exactly the same thing, 1 perfectly roasted bird. The presentation was stunning. You'd place a golden hen on each plate with roasted vegetables around it. Cornish game hens disappeared when they fell out of fashion in the 1980s. They were seen as dated and trying too hard to be fancy. By the 1990s, most people had never cooked Cornish game hens, and grocery stores stopped carrying them regularly. But Cornish game hens are still available at most supermarkets. They cost about $5 each, which makes a Christmas dinner for 6 people cost $30 total. Standing rib roast, also called prime rib, was the ultimate beef Christmas dinner in the 1950s. Betty Crocker's recipe roasted a bone-in rib roast until it was perfectly medium rare, then served it with Yorkshire pudding made from the drippings. The result was a dinner that was luxurious, beefy, and incredibly satisfying. In the 1950s, standing rib roast was what you served when you wanted to show off. The roast was expensive, impressive, and required confidence to cook correctly. You'd season it simply, just salt, pepper, and maybe garlic, then roast it at high heat until the outside formed a dark crust and the inside stayed pink and juicy. The flavor of prime rib is intensely beefy. The marbling melts during cooking, basting the meat from the inside. The bones add flavor and help the meat cook evenly. The crust is savory and crispy, and the interior is tender and rich. Yorkshire pudding, a pop-over-like bread made from beef drippings, eggs, flour, and milk, soaks up the meat juices and adds a satisfying doughy element. The genius of standing rib roast was its simplicity. You didn't need complicated seasonings or techniques. Good beef, properly cooked, was enough. The key was monitoring the internal temperature. Pull it out at 120 degrees for rare, 130 degrees for medium rare. Let it rest for 20 minutes, and it would come up to the perfect temperature. Standing rib roast is still popular, but it's less common at home Christmas dinners than it was in the 1950s. The cost intimidates people. A good rib roast costs about $80 to $100. 7 Christmas dinners down, 23 to go, and you're already seeing what we lost. These weren't just meals, they were traditions. They were the dinners that grandmothers spent all day preparing, that families looked forward to all year. We replaced them with store-bought convenience, and we lost the flavors, the techniques, and the memories.
This is the best family dinner ever!
But here's the thing. These recipes still work. They're not impossible. They just require planning and effort. The next set of dinners gets even more forgotten. These are the ones that only appeared in specific editions of Betty Crocker's cookbook, the regional favorites that never went mainstream. Let's keep going. Salmon mousse ring was the elegant seafood Christmas dinner that showed you had taste. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe created a molded ring of salmon mousse. made from poached salmon, cream, gelatin, and seasonings, then filled the center with cold shrimp in cocktail sauce. The result was a cold dinner that was light, sophisticated, and perfect for Christmas Eve. In the 1950s, molded dishes were the height of elegance. A salmon mousse ring looked like something from a fancy hotel restaurant. The pink salmon mousse contrasted beautifully with the red cocktail sauce and pink shrimp. You'd unmold it onto a platter lined with lettuce leaves, and it would hold its shape perfectly. The flavor of salmon mousse was subtle and creamy. The salmon was delicate, the cream made it rich, and the gelatin gave it structure without making it rubbery. Baked ham in pastry crust, similar to beef Wellington but with ham, was a 1950s Christmas dinner that turned an ordinary ham into something spectacular. Betty Crocker's recipe wrapped a fully cooked ham in a pastry crust made from flour, butter, and cream, then baked it until the crust was golden. The result was a ham that looked impressive and tasted like a savory pie. In the 1950s, baked ham in pastry crust was popular because it elevated a basic ham into a showpiece. The pastry crust could be decorated with cutouts, stars, holly leaves, bells, which made it look festive. When you sliced into it, the layers were visible: golden crust, pink ham. The genius of this dinner was how it kept the ham moist. The pastry crust sealed in all the juices, and the ham steamed inside its pastry shell. The crust absorbed some of the ham flavor and fat, making it savory and delicious. You'd serve slices of ham with chunks of pastry, and both elements were equally good. Baked ham in pastry crust disappeared when effort-intensive dinners fell out of fashion in the 1970s. Making pastry from scratch, wrapping a ham, and decorating it was seen as too much work. Pre-glazed hams became popular, and the pastry-wrapped version was forgotten. Turkey roulade was a boneless turkey breast, rolled around stuffing, tied with twine, and roasted until golden. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe butterflied a turkey breast, pounded it flat, spread herb stuffing over the surface, rolled it up, and roasted it. The result was a turkey dinner that was easier to carve and more impressive than a whole bird. In the 1950s, turkey roulade was what you made when you wanted turkey but didn't want to deal with a whole bird. The roulade cooked faster, about 90 minutes instead of 4 hours, carved easier, just slice through the roll, and looked elegant on the platter. The flavor was concentrated turkey and stuffing in every bite. The herb stuffing, made from bread, sage, thyme, butter, and broth, spiraled through the turkey. When you sliced the roulade, each piece had a pinwheel pattern. The outside of the turkey got crispy and brown, while the inside stayed moist. Turkey roulade disappeared when boneless turkey breasts became less common in stores in the 1980s. Most stores only sold whole turkeys or pre-cut turkey parts, and butterflying a turkey breast required knife skills most home cooks didn't have. But you can ask a butcher to butterfly a turkey breast for you. A turkey breast costs about $20, and the stuffing costs about $5. Chicken fricassee was a French-style braised chicken dinner that was popular at Christmas in the 1950s. Betty Crocker's recipe browned chicken pieces in butter, then simmered them in a cream sauce with vegetables until the chicken was tender and the sauce was rich. The result was a dinner that was comforting, elegant, and completely different from roast chicken. In the 1950s, chicken fricassee was considered refined. It was a dish you'd find at French restaurants, but Betty Crocker made it accessible for home cooks. The chicken was fall-apart tender, the cream sauce was velvety, and the vegetables, usually pearl onions, mushrooms, and carrots, added color and texture. But chicken fricassee is delicious and easy. The recipe costs about $15, chicken, cream, vegetables, and feeds 6 people. It can be made a day ahead and reheated. Betty Crocker's recipe is the classic. Baked stuffed fish was a Christmas dinner for coastal families in the 1950s. Betty Crocker's recipe butterflied a whole fish, usually striped bass or cod, stuffed it with a mixture of breadcrumbs, shrimp, crab meat, and herbs, then baked it until the fish was flaky and the stuffing was golden. The result was a dinner that was light, flavorful, and impressive. In the 1950s, baked stuffed fish was popular in New England and coastal regions where fresh fish was abundant. The dish was elegant and showed off the cook's skills, butterflying a fish, making seafood stuffing, and baking it perfectly required technique. But baked stuffed fish is easier than it looks. A whole fish costs about $25, and the stuffing costs about $10. The dinner feeds 6 to 8 people. Betty Crocker's recipe includes detailed butterflying instructions. Veal roast was a luxurious Christmas dinner in the 1950s. Betty Crocker's recipe roasted a veal shoulder until tender, then served it with a mushroom sauce made from butter, flour, cream, and sautéed mushrooms. The result was a dinner that was mild, tender, and elegant. In the 1950s, veal was more common and less controversial than it is today. Veal roast disappeared when veal became controversial in the 1980s due to animal welfare concerns. Many people stopped eating veal entirely, and it disappeared from most American tables. But ethically raised veal is available. A veal roast costs about $50 and feeds 8 people. Betty Crocker's recipe is the classic preparation. Stuffing pork loin with prune and apple stuffing was a 1950s Christmas dinner that combined sweet and savory flavors perfectly. Betty Crocker's recipe butterflied a pork loin, spread a stuffing made from prunes, apples, bread, and spices over the surface, rolled it up, and roasted it. The result was a dinner that was sweet, savory, and incredibly flavorful. In the 1950s, pork and fruit was a common pairing. Prunes were popular in cooking before they became associated with digestive issues, and the combination of pork, prunes, and apples was considered sophisticated. The flavor was a balance of sweet fruit and savory pork. But prunes, now rebranded as dried plums, are delicious in cooking. A pork loin costs about $20, and the stuffing costs about $5. The dinner feeds 8 people. Betty Crocker's recipe is excellent. Baked chicken with 40 cloves of garlic was a French-inspired Christmas dinner that sounds overwhelming but tastes amazing. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe roasted a whole chicken with 40 unpeeled garlic cloves, herbs, and white wine until the chicken was golden and the garlic was soft and sweet. The result was a dinner that was aromatic, flavorful, and surprisingly mild. The genius of this dinner was how the garlic transformed. Raw garlic is sharp and pungent. Roasted garlic is sweet, nutty, and almost buttery. You'd squeeze the roasted garlic out of its skin and spread it on bread or mix it into the pan sauce. The dish costs about $15, chicken, garlic, wine, herbs, and feeds 4 to 6 people. Betty Crocker's recipe is the classic version. Stuffed pork chops were a Christmas dinner that combined ease and elegance. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe cut thick pork chops with a pocket, stuffed them with sage dressing, and baked them until golden. The result was a dinner that looked impressive but was simple to make. In the 1950s, stuffed pork chops were popular because they were portion-controlled, 1 chop per person, and the stuffing made them feel special. The flavor was classic holiday comfort food. The pork chops were juicy and savory. The sage dressing added the familiar Thanksgiving, Christmas flavors. The combination was satisfying and nostalgic. The dinner costs about $20 and feeds 6 people. Betty Crocker's recipe includes instructions for cutting the pocket. Roast capon was a Christmas dinner that fell between chicken and turkey in size and flavor. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe roasted a capon, a castrated rooster, until the skin was golden and crispy, then served it with chestnut dressing. The result was a bird that was more flavorful than chicken and more tender than turkey. In the 1950s, capons were popular for small Christmas gatherings. A capon weighed about 8 to 10 pounds, larger than a chicken, smaller than a turkey, and fed 6 to 8 people. Today, capons are rare outside of specialty butchers, but if you can find a capon, it's worth trying. They cost about $40 and feed 8 people. Betty Crocker's recipe is the classic preparation. Baked turkey breast with cranberry glaze was the solution for small families who wanted turkey but didn't need a whole bird. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe roasted a bone-in turkey breast, then brushed it with a glaze made from cranberry sauce, orange juice, and brown sugar. The result was turkey dinner for 4 to 6 people without leftovers for weeks. Most people use dry rubs or herb butter instead of fruit glazes. The dinner costs about $15, turkey breast, cranberry sauce, orange juice, and feeds 6 people. Betty Crocker's cranberry glaze recipe is excellent. Beef stroganoff was a Russian-inspired Christmas dinner that became popular in America during the 1950s. Betty Crocker's recipe seared strips of beef tenderloin, then simmered them in a sauce made from sour cream, mushrooms, onions, and beef broth. The result was a dinner that was creamy, rich, and elegant. Beef stroganoff is still made today, but it's less common at Christmas dinners than it was in the 1950s. The dish costs about $30, beef tenderloin, sour cream, mushrooms, and feeds 6 people. Betty Crocker's recipe is the classic version. Honey-glazed corned beef was an Irish-American Christmas dinner that was especially popular in the Northeast. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe boiled corned beef until tender, then finished it in the oven with a honey and mustard glaze. The result was corned beef that was sweet, salty, and tender. The flavor was a balance of salty corned beef and sweet honey. Honey-glazed corned beef is rare today, though regular corned beef is still popular. The honey-glazed version costs about $25 and feeds 8 people. Betty Crocker's recipe is straightforward. 20 Christmas dinners down, 10 to go. And we're getting into the truly forgotten territory now. The dinners that were regional, the ones that required specialty ingredients, the ones that only appeared in specific editions of Betty Crocker's cookbook. These are the Christmas dinners that even vintage cooking enthusiasts might not know, but every single one was served at American Christmas tables in the 1950s, and every single one is worth making. Let's finish strong. Pheasant with cream sauce was a Christmas dinner for hunters and rural families who had access to wild game. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe roasted pheasant until the meat was tender, then served it with a cream sauce made from the pan drippings, flour, cream, and white wine. The result was a dinner that was gamey, rich, and elegant. Pheasant with cream sauce disappeared when hunting became less common and wild game became harder to obtain. By the 1980s, most Americans had never tasted pheasant, but farm-raised pheasant is available online. One pheasant costs about $25 and feeds 2 to 3 people. Betty Crocker's recipe is the classic preparation. Lamb crown roast was the elegant alternative to pork crown roast. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe tied lamb rib chops into a crown shape, roasted them until medium rare, then served them with mint jelly. The result was a dinner that was impressive, flavorful, and distinctly British-inspired. In the 1950s, lamb was more popular at Christmas than it is today. The crown roast presentation was dramatic, and the mint jelly was traditional. The lamb would be roasted with the bones pointing up, creating a crown shape. The flavor of lamb is rich and slightly gamey. The mint jelly added sweetness that balanced the lamb's strong flavor. You'd serve it with roasted potatoes and peas. Lamb crown roast disappeared when lamb became less popular in American cuisine. By the 1980s, most Americans rarely ate lamb outside of Greek or Middle Eastern restaurants. But lamb is making a comeback. A lamb crown roast costs about $60 and feeds 6 to 8 people. Betty Crocker's recipe is the classic version. Turkey tetrazzini was a Christmas dinner made from leftovers that became impressive enough to serve as a main course. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe combined cooked turkey, spaghetti, mushrooms, and peas in a cream sauce, topped it with cheese and breadcrumbs, and baked it until golden. The result was a casserole that was creamy, comforting, and delicious. In the 1950s, turkey tetrazzini was popular on December 26th, when families wanted to use up leftover Christmas turkey. But some families made it intentionally for Christmas dinner because it was easier than roasting a whole bird. The flavor was rich and creamy. The mushrooms added earthiness, the peas added sweetness, and the cheese and breadcrumbs created a golden crust. The dish was served hot from the oven. Turkey tetrazzini is still made today, but less commonly than it was in the 1950s. The recipe costs about $15 if using leftover turkey, and feeds 8 people. Betty Crocker's recipe is the classic version. Baked ham loaf was ground ham shaped into a loaf, glazed with pineapple and brown sugar, and baked until caramelized. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe combined ground ham with ground pork, breadcrumbs, eggs, and seasonings, then topped it with pineapple rings and glaze. The result was a dinner that looked like meatloaf but tasted like glazed ham. In the 1950s, ham loaf was popular because it stretched expensive ham by mixing it with cheaper ground pork. The pineapple glaze made it festive and Christmas appropriate. The flavor was sweet, salty, and smoky. The ham added richness, the pork added moisture, and the pineapple glaze caramelized during baking. You'd serve it sliced with sweet potatoes and green beans. Baked ham loaf disappeared when ground ham became less common. By the 1980s, most butchers stopped selling ground ham, but you can grind ham yourself or ask a butcher to do it. The dinner costs about $20 and feeds 8 people. Betty Crocker's recipe is unique. Chicken and oyster pie was a Christmas dinner that combined 2 proteins in one elegant pie. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe layered cooked chicken and fresh oysters in a pie dish, covered them with a cream sauce, topped it with pie crust, and baked until golden. The result was a savory pie that was rich, creamy, and impressive. In the 1950s, combining chicken and oysters was traditional in coastal regions. Oysters were added to chicken pies to make them feel special and Christmas appropriate. The flavor was a combination of savory chicken, briny oysters, and rich cream sauce. The pie crust was flaky and buttery. You'd serve it with a simple green salad. Chicken and oyster pie disappeared when oysters became expensive. By the 1980s, the dish was rare. But if oysters are available, this pie is worth making. It costs about $30 and feeds 6 people. Betty Crocker's recipe is the classic version. Roast rabbit was a Christmas dinner for rural families who raised rabbits or hunted them. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe roasted a whole rabbit with herbs, garlic, and white wine until the meat was tender. The result was a dinner that was mild, slightly gamey, and very tender. In the 1950s, rabbit was common in rural areas. The meat tastes like a cross between chicken and pork, mild and slightly sweet. Roast rabbit was often served at Christmas because it was special but affordable. The flavor was delicate. The herbs, rosemary, thyme, sage, added aromatics, and the white wine kept the meat moist. moist. You'd serve it with roasted vegetables. Roast rabbit disappeared when rabbit became less common in American diets. By the 1980s, most people wouldn't consider eating rabbit, but rabbit is available at specialty butchers and online. One rabbit costs about $20 and feeds 4 people. Betty Crocker's recipe is straightforward. Baked cod with lobster sauce was a New England Christmas dinner that showcased regional seafood at its finest. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe baked thick cod fillets until they were flaky and tender, then topped them with a luxurious sauce made from fresh lobster meat, butter, heavy cream, and dry sherry. The result was a dinner that was elegant, rich, and impossibly luxurious, the kind of meal that made guests feel like they were dining at an upscale Boston restaurant. In the 1950s, this dinner was popular in coastal New England, particularly in Massachusetts, Maine, and Rhode Island, where both cod and lobster were abundant and relatively affordable. This was before overfishing devastated cod populations and before lobster became the expensive luxury item it is today. In the 1950s, lobster was considered a working-class food in coastal communities, and cod was one of the most common fish you could buy. Combining them into one dinner was practical and delicious. The genius of baked cod with lobster sauce was how it elevated 2 simple ingredients into something spectacular. Cod on its own is mild and can be bland if not prepared carefully, but when you baked it with butter, lemon, and white wine, then topped it with a rich lobster sauce, it became a showstopper. The lobster sauce was the star, made by sautéing chunks of lobster meat in butter, then adding heavy cream, a splash of sherry, and a touch of lemon juice. The sauce was thick, velvety, and tasted like the ocean in the best possible way. The preparation was surprisingly straightforward. You'd start by seasoning thick cod fillets with salt, pepper, and a squeeze of lemon juice, then placing them in a buttered baking dish. A few pats of butter on top and a splash of white wine in the bottom of the dish kept the fish moist during baking. The cod would bake at 375 degrees for about 20 minutes until it flaked easily with a fork. While the cod baked, you'd make the lobster sauce. If you had whole lobsters, you'd steam them, pick the meat, and chop it into chunks. If you bought pre-cooked lobster meat, which was common and affordable in the 1950s, you'd just need to warm it. The sauce started with butter melted in a saucepan. You'd add the lobster meat and sauté it for a minute or two, just until it was heated through. Then came the cream, lots of it, and a generous splash of dry sherry. The mixture would simmer gently until it thickened slightly, about 5 minutes. A squeeze of lemon juice at the end brightened the flavors, and a pinch of cayenne pepper added a subtle heat that balanced the richness. The flavor of baked cod with lobster sauce was a study in contrasts. The cod was mild, delicate, and slightly sweet. The lobster sauce was rich, briny, and intensely flavorful. The butter and cream made everything luxurious and silky. The sherry added depth and a subtle sweetness. The lemon juice cut through the richness and kept the dish from feeling heavy. When you took a bite, you got tender, flaky cod coated in creamy lobster sauce. It was decadent, but not overwhelming. The presentation was important. You'd arrange the baked cod fillets on a serving platter or individual plates, then spoon the lobster sauce generously over the top, making sure each fillet was well covered. Some cooks would garnish with fresh parsley or a lemon wedge, and the dish would be served immediately while everything was hot. You'd typically serve it with rice pilaf, or boiled new potatoes to soak up the extra sauce, and steamed asparagus or green beans for a pop of color. Baked cod with lobster sauce disappeared when both cod and lobster became expensive and harder to find. In the 1970s, cod populations began to decline due to overfishing, and fresh cod became more expensive. At the same time, lobster transformed from a working-class food into a luxury item. What was once an affordable New England Christmas dinner became prohibitively expensive for most families. By the 1980s, the dish was too costly for regular home cooking, and it vanished from most Christmas tables. It survived only in a few upscale restaurants and traditional New England families who refused to let the recipe die. But if you want to splurge and recreate this classic Christmas dinner, it's absolutely worth it. The dish costs about $50 to make. $30 for lobster meat, you'll need about 1 pound, $15 for good quality cod fillets, about 2 pounds, and $5 for cream, butter, and sherry. It feeds 4 people generously, which makes it about $12 to $13 per person for a restaurant-quality meal. Compare that to ordering seafood at a restaurant where a similar dish would cost $30 to $40 per person, and suddenly making it at home seems reasonable. Betty Crocker's recipe is the classic New England version, and it's worth following closely. The key is not to overcook the cod. It should be just barely cooked through, still moist and tender. And the lobster sauce should be rich but not gluey. If it's too thick, thin it with a little extra cream or a splash of fish stock. This is a dinner that looks and tastes like you spent all day in the kitchen, but the actual cooking time is under 40 minutes. It's impressive, it's delicious, and it's a piece of New England Christmas history. Pork and sauerkraut was a German-American Christmas dinner that was especially popular in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and other Midwestern states with large German immigrant populations. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe slow-cooked a pork roast with sauerkraut, sliced apples, onions, and caraway seeds until the meat was fall-apart tender and the sauerkraut was sweet and tangy. The result was a dinner that was deeply flavorful, comforting, and steeped in tradition. In the 1950s, German-American families considered pork and sauerkraut essential for New Year's Day because it was believed to bring good luck and prosperity in the coming year. The pork symbolized progress because pigs root forward, and the sauerkraut represented wealth because of its golden color. But many families also served it at Christmas, either as the main dinner or as part of a multi-day holiday feast. The dish was practical, pork shoulder was cheap, sauerkraut came in jars or cans, and the whole thing cooked low and slow without much attention. The genius of pork and sauerkraut was how the flavors melded together during the long cooking time. The pork would start out tough and fatty, but after 3 to 4 hours of braising, it transformed into something tender, juicy, and incredibly flavorful. The caraway seeds added a distinctive flavor, slightly bitter, slightly sweet, and unmistakably German. The preparation was simple. You'd start with a pork shoulder roast, about 4 to 5 pounds, seasoned generously with salt, pepper, and paprika. Some recipes called for browning the pork first in a hot skillet to develop a crust, but Betty Crocker's version skipped that step for simplicity. The pork went into a large Dutch oven or roasting pan. Then came the sauerkraut, 2 to 3 pounds, drained but not rinsed. You wanted some of that brine for flavor. You'd pile the sauerkraut on top of and around the pork. Then add sliced apples, usually tart varieties like Granny Smith, sliced onions, a tablespoon of caraway seeds, and a cup of chicken broth or apple cider to keep everything moist. The whole thing went into a 325-degree oven covered tightly with a lid or foil and cooked for 3 to 4 hours. You'd check it occasionally, adding more liquid if it looked dry, but mostly you'd just let it do its thing. The house would smell incredible. Pork, sauerkraut, apples, and caraway created an aroma that was warm, savory, and unmistakably holiday-like. The flavor of pork and sauerkraut was a perfect balance. The pork was salty, rich, and fatty. The sauerkraut was sour and tangy, but the long cooking mellowed it considerably. The apples added sweetness that balanced the sourness of the kraut and the saltiness of the pork. The onions became soft and sweet, almost melting into the sauerkraut. The caraway seeds added complexity. a flavor that's hard to describe but instantly recognizable if you've ever had rye bread or German sausage. The result was a dish that tasted like comfort, tradition, and home. When the pork was done, you'd pull it out of the oven and let it rest for 10 minutes. The meat would be so tender that it fell apart when you tried to slice it, which was fine, because most families just shredded it with forks and served it mixed with the sauerkraut. You'd pile everything onto a platter, shredded pork, sauerkraut, apples, onions, and serve it with boiled potatoes or mashed potatoes on the side. Some families added German potato salad or rye bread to soak up the juices. Pork and sauerkraut is still made today in German-American communities, especially in Pennsylvania Dutch country, where the tradition remains strong. But outside those regions, the dish is less common than it was in the 1950s. By the 1980s, sauerkraut had fallen out of favor with younger generations who found its flavor too strong or too old-fashioned. Pork shoulder, once the cheapest cut of meat, became less common in grocery stores as boneless pork chops and tenderloin became more popular. But pork and sauerkraut deserves a comeback. It's one of the most economical Christmas dinners you can make. A pork shoulder costs about $12, sauerkraut costs $3, apples and onions cost $3, and the remaining ingredients cost $2. Total cost $20. That feeds 8 people, which is $2.50 per person for a hearty, satisfying meal. You can't beat that value. The dish is also incredibly forgiving. You can't really overcook it. The longer it cooks, the more tender the pork becomes. If you prefer less sauerkraut flavor, rinse the kraut before using it to remove some of the brine. If you like it more tangy, don't rinse it at all. You can add more apples for sweetness, or skip them if you prefer a more savory version. Some families added brown sugar or maple syrup to the sauerkraut for extra sweetness. Others added juniper berries for a piney, gin-like flavor. The recipe is flexible and adapts to your taste. Betty Crocker's recipe is the classic version, straightforward, traditional, and foolproof. It's the kind of recipe that gets passed down through families, written on stained index cards, and made year after year. If you have German heritage, this dish is a direct connection to your ancestors' Christmas tables. If you don't, it's still worth trying because it's delicious, economical, and completely different from the typical American Christmas dinner. This is what Christmas tasted like for millions of German-American families in the 1950s. It's time to bring it back. Baked chicken with rice and almonds was a Middle Eastern-inspired Christmas dinner that became surprisingly popular in America during the 1950s. Betty Crocker's recipe baked chicken pieces on a bed of rice that was mixed with toasted almonds, golden raisins, and warm spices like cinnamon, allspice, and turmeric. The result was a one-pan dinner that was aromatic, flavorful, colorful, and completely different from traditional American holiday fare. In the 1950s, Americans were becoming increasingly interested in international cuisine. Soldiers who had served in North Africa and the Middle East during World War II brought back memories of exotic foods, and cookbooks started featuring foreign recipes that were accessible to home cooks. Middle Eastern flavors, fragrant spices, dried fruits, nuts, were exotic and interesting, but not so unfamiliar that they scared people away. This dish represented that perfect balance, familiar enough, chicken and rice, but exciting enough, almonds, raisins, spices, to feel special. The genius of baked chicken with rice and almonds was how the cooking method created layers of flavor. The chicken pieces, usually bone in thighs and drumsticks, were placed on top of a bed of rice that had been mixed with aromatics and spices. As the chicken baked, its fat and juices dripped down into the rice below, flavoring every grain. The rice absorbed all the chicken drippings, the spices bloomed in the heat, and the almonds and raisins added pockets of crunch and sweetness throughout. The preparation was simple but required a little organization. You'd start by making the rice mixture. Long-grain white rice was combined with chicken broth, toasted slivered almonds, golden raisins, finely chopped onions, minced garlic, ground cinnamon, ground allspice, turmeric, which gave the rice a beautiful golden color, salt, and pepper. Everything got mixed together and spread into a large baking dish, ideally a 9x13-inch pan or a large, shallow roasting pan. Then came the chicken. You'd season bone-in, skin-on chicken pieces with salt, pepper, paprika, and a little extra cinnamon. Some recipes called for browning the chicken first in a skillet to render some fat and create color, but Betty Crocker's version skipped that step for simplicity. The chicken pieces were arranged on top of the rice mixture, skin side up. A few pats of butter on top of each chicken piece helped the skin brown and crisp up during baking. The whole thing was covered tightly with aluminum foil and baked at 350 degrees for about an hour. Covering it was crucial. It trapped steam, which cooked the rice and kept the chicken moist. After an hour, you'd remove the foil and bake for another 20 to 30 minutes, which allowed the chicken skin to brown and crisp up, and the rice on the edges to get slightly crunchy and toasted. The flavor of baked chicken with rice and almonds was complex and satisfying. The chicken was savory, juicy, and had a hint of sweetness from the cinnamon. The rice was fragrant and aromatic, with warm spices that tasted like Christmas, even though they weren't traditional holiday spices. The almonds added crunch and a nutty richness. The raisins provided little bursts of sweetness that balanced the savory chicken and spices. Every bite was different. Sometimes you'd get rice with almonds, sometimes rice with raisins, sometimes a piece of crispy chicken skin. Chicken thighs and drumsticks were cheap. Rice was cheap, and the almonds and raisins added luxury without breaking the bank. Third, it was mostly hands-off cooking. Once everything was in the pan, you could walk away for an hour and focus on other dishes or spend time with family. The dish disappeared when interest in international cuisine shifted in different directions during the 1970s and 1980s. Chinese food, Italian food, and Mexican food became more popular, and Middle Eastern flavors fell out of the mainstream. By the 1990s, most Americans associated cinnamon and rice with breakfast, cinnamon toast, rice pudding, rather than dinner, and the combination seemed odd to younger cooks who had never experienced this style of cooking. But baked chicken with rice and almonds is less common today than it should be. The recipe costs about $20 to make. $8 for chicken, $4 for rice, $3 for almonds, $2 for raisins, and $3 for spices and aromatics. It feeds 6 people generously, which is about $3 to $4 per person. It's economical, it's easy, and it's delicious. Betty Crocker's recipe is unique and represents a moment in American culinary history when home cooks were eager to experiment with flavors from around the world. The dish is also endlessly adaptable. Don't like raisins? Use dried apricots or dried cranberries. Want more crunch? Add cashews or pistachios along with the almonds. Prefer darker meat? Use all thighs. Want vegetables? Add diced carrots, peas, or bell peppers to the rice mixture. The base recipe is forgiving and welcomes improvisation. Crown roast of lamb with couscous stuffing was a sophisticated Christmas dinner that combined French technique with North African flavors, creating a dish that was exotic, impressive, and absolutely stunning on the table. Betty Crocker's 1950s recipe created a crown shape from lamb rib chops, tied together in a circle with the bones pointing upward, then filled the center with couscous that was mixed with dried fruits, apricots, dates, raisins, toasted nuts, almonds, pistachios, and warm spices, cinnamon, cumin, coriander. The lamb was roasted until it reached medium rare, and the couscous stuffing absorbed all the lamb drippings during cooking. The result was a dinner that was rich, flavorful, exotic, and looked like something from a magazine. In the 1950s, this dinner represented the absolute height of culinary sophistication. Crown roasts were already considered fancy, they required a skilled butcher to prepare, and they looked dramatic when presented. Adding couscous, a grain that was virtually unknown in America at the time, made the dish feel worldly and cultured. This was the kind of dinner you served when you wanted to prove you were well-traveled, well-read, and adventurous in the kitchen. It was restaurant-quality cooking brought into the home. The preparation of crown roast of lamb with couscous stuffing was elaborate but achievable if you broke it down into steps. First, you needed a crown roast of lamb. This required ordering ahead from a butcher. The butcher would take 2 lamb rib roasts, each with 7 to 8 ribs, French the bones, scrape them clean, and tie them together in a circle with kitchen twine so the bones pointed upward like a crown. The resulting roast would have 14 to 16 ribs and stand upright in the roasting pan. If you had a good relationship with your butcher, they might even wrap the bone tips in foil to prevent them from burning during roasting. Next came the couscous stuffing, which was where the North African influence came in. In the 1950s, couscous was still exotic and hard to find. You'd need to go to a specialty store or an international market. The couscous was cooked according to package directions, usually steamed or soaked in hot broth, then mixed with toasted slivered almonds, chopped pistachios, diced dried apricots, chopped dates, golden raisins, minced onions that had been sautéed in butter and spices, cinnamon, cumin, ground coriander, and a pinch of cayenne pepper. The mixture was fluffy, fragrant, and studded with jewel-toned fruits and nuts. The lamb crown roast was seasoned generously with salt, pepper, and a rub made from minced garlic, olive oil, fresh rosemary, and lemon zest. The outside of the roast was rubbed all over with this mixture, which created a flavorful crust during roasting. The crown was placed upright in a roasting pan, and the couscous stuffing was spooned into the center, piling it high. Any extra stuffing was baked separately in a casserole dish. The roast went into a 375-degree oven and cooked for about 60 to 75 minutes, depending on how many ribs were in the crown. The goal was to reach an internal temperature of 130 degrees to 135 degrees for medium rare, any hotter, and the lamb would become dry and gamey. As the lamb roasted, its fat and juices dripped down into the couscous stuffing, flavoring it and making it incredibly rich. The bones turned golden, the exterior of the lamb developed a dark, crispy crust, and the stuffing in the center absorbed all the lamb flavor. The flavor of crown roast of lamb with couscous stuffing was complex and luxurious. The lamb was rich, slightly gamey, and intensely flavorful, much more so than beef or pork. The garlic-rosemary crust added aromatics and a slight bitterness that balanced the lamb's richness. The couscous stuffing was a revelation, fluffy and light, but loaded with sweet dried fruits, crunchy nuts, and warm spices. Every bite combined tender lamb, crispy crust, and fragrant stuffing. The dried apricots added tartness, the dates added caramel-like sweetness, the pistachios and almonds added crunch, and the spices tied everything together. The presentation of this dish was absolutely stunning. You'd bring the crown roast to the table whole, the bones pointing up like a crown, the couscous stuffing piled high in the center, the exterior of the lamb dark and caramelized. Some cooks would put paper frills on the bone tips to make it even more dramatic. You'd carve between the ribs, giving each person 1 or 2 lamb chops with a generous scoop of couscous stuffing. The visual impact alone was worth the effort. Crown roast of lamb with couscous stuffing disappeared when elaborate, time-intensive dinners fell out of fashion in the 1970s and 1980s. This level of complexity and effort became rare in home kitchens as people prioritized convenience and speed. Lamb itself became less popular in American cuisine. By the 1990s, most Americans rarely ate lamb outside of Greek or Middle Eastern restaurants. And couscous, while more available than it was in the 1950s, never became a mainstream staple the way rice or pasta did. But this dinner is worth making for a special Christmas, if not this year, then for a milestone celebration. Yes, it's expensive. A crown roast of lamb costs about $70 from a good butcher. The couscous stuffing costs about $10. Couscous, dried fruits, nuts, spices. Total cost, $80 for a dinner that feeds 8 people. That's $10 per person for a show-stopping, restaurant-quality meal that people will remember for years. Betty Crocker's recipe is elaborate but achievable. The key is preparation. Order the lamb crown ahead, make the stuffing the day before, and give yourself plenty of time on the day of cooking. The actual hands-on work is maybe 45 minutes. The rest is roasting time. 30 Christmas dinners. Every single one was served at American tables in the 1950s. Every single one has been forgotten, and every single one deserves to come back. These weren't just meals. They were traditions that defined what Christmas tasted like for an entire generation. We replaced crown roast of pork with spiral-cut ham from Costco. We replaced roast goose with rotisserie chicken. We traded skill and tradition for convenience. But these recipes still work. They're still impressive, they're still delicious, and they're still better than anything you'll buy pre-made.